Rise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies formed supremely pure, with devotion like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the three worlds, the winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme sight, face like spotless moon, colour like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the three worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Saviour having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, a holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts. To you, the sublime community in human virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three every devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms, atoms in all aspects. With supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the foul faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. To page 15, to the Heart of Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the eye of Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time the Bhagavan was dwelling on Masadhoja's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of Bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perfection. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness. Without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odour, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, Bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment, relies on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as the truth, since it is not false. future, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoiced. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadamiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, Ashuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. Page 25 of the short mandala. Sashi Puji Shushi Metotra Viva Vijini Ekepadi Samye Shinku Mikte Uwaki Drogonamda Shimla Chopasho Jetsa Lama Dame Kenamki Chukukala Kensi Tritene Jeta Samel Duji Zimala Sakye Chuku Chapa Batu So Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniyataya Sanye Chelam Soji Chelam Chanchu Bhagavad Gita Suchi Dagi Chechen Jimbe Sonanti Roha Kanchi Sanye Drupasho Sanye Chelam Soji Chelam Chanchu Bhagavad Gita Suchi Dagi Chechen Jimbe Sonanti Roha Kanchi Sanye Drupasho Sanye Chelam Soji Chelam Chanchu Bhagavad Gita Suchi Dagi Chechen Jimbe Sonanti Roha Kanchi Sanye Drupasho Sanye Chechen Jimbe
First, we should assume the correct motivation before listening to the Dharma, Mahayana Dharma. So that motive should be one of the heart of awakening, the bodhicitta. If we don't have such a motivation, we don't have that motivation, it doesn't become listening to that Mahayana Dharma. So that motivation should be that today one is going to assume the heart of kindness, meaning a beneficial intention directed towards all living beings. With that thought, listen to the teaching and join your mind with that. Now, Joyce, taking on as fortunate to hear and reflect on this ornament of clear realization. If we were born such as the insect that's making a noise, the insect cannot understand this, what we're hearing, but we can hear and understand it. In that light, we're very fortunate.
Oh yeah. 먼저 디시를 드림 제대로 그 남베 뒤에 남 공부와 산타 가두고디 먼저 상매 규례야 산je 누가 요래서 진짜 봐야지 부게 되는데 콜레 이 산je 누가 요래서 나 무슨 미다 시험을 그 산je 누가디 이야 가만야 보지 태우나 안돼 잡대 이제 그 산je 누가디가 탐난다 이제로 이제 오마테나나 유진 도자데 체는 안도 그 거발라 잡대 요래서 그 남바게 도나로디 데레다디 남베 슝네 시에나 시나디 야지 서신 좀 수수 다제 제비나 아니 수수 산제 리디 야 제담비나 당기로 왔다 셈바 수수 셈의 요당기로 그러와 셈이 제비기요 셈 상고스요 그래서 이제 통도 안 가시 당고 농사고 가두이나 병안안람이 제일 남배 사무실을 시작하두이는지 다시 현자 신고에 신배가 상담이 차로다 어디 요야 얘기를 해 다래 어디 줘야 그 탑남디 so shiki or context tamundi yaki context tangu reyes and chiwa tila ninja bunyores.
Today, in this lesson, in the context of Buddha Dharma, we are looking to cultivate a valid path towards bliss, ultimate well-being, ultimate bliss. And we would say that all sentient beings possess that potential for cultivating such an ultimate state of bliss. Even this, let alone this insect buzzing here, having that potential to be awakened to Buddha nature, of course, goes without saying. Human beings have within them that potential to awaken to that state of Buddhahood. However, in that light, if they meet with a valid method and put into practice that method, the state of Buddhahood will be reached. If they don't, if those beings with that potential don't meet with such a method and or practice a wrong method, cause and conditions that are invalid and faulty, they will continue to cycle uncontrollably in samsara. So this is something we should check up. This is not something made up by Buddha, made up by the Buddha Dharma. This is very much the case of checking up one's own potential, one's rig, meaning the tathagata, whether or not you can improve that Buddha nature. Now we can see this in reality. There are some who can improve that mind so that they become kind-hearted. So some are initially quite irritable people, very fixated on themselves, always thinking I, but latterly, due to changing that and working with their mind, they become more relaxed and solely think on others' benefit. So they have found a method by which they can improve their own mind. Okay, so then we've been looking over the last weeks in the context of these three exalted knowers. And this is a very vast subject. We don't have time to go into these three exalted knowers very thoroughly and deeply. What we have come to know is that there are three exalted knowers, 4 types of trainings that have to be accomplished to get to those states. And then the one topic of the resultant Buddha, making 8 topics, 3 plus 4 plus 1. Now, we've looked basically at these 3 exalted knowers. What we now come to look at, as it is termed here, are these applications. Well, let's say trainings. What does it mean by training? How do we train in these goals? Well, that's really what this 4th chapter, Kapshipa, this 4th chapter that we're studying, this ocean of sport, is about. How to train to get the goals of the 3 exalted ones. So in short, we could say that all of the valid paths that you could cultivate, valid path consciousnesses, are subsumed or condensed in these 3 exalted knowers. So let's look at it. All of the things you need to cultivate in terms of a valid path consciousness, as a hero or solitary realizes, are subsumed within the knower basises, the first category. And all of the things that you need to know in terms of the Bodhisattva trainings as attuned within the knower of paths, and all of the things that you need to know as an exalted knower of all, as an omniscient Buddha, are in that third category. So all of the valid paths are there. Let's look at then the first category of the knower of basis and what is to be trained in there. Well, your focal object here are the Four Noble Truths. This is what you're focusing on, the Four Truths for Aryas, and you're focusing on getting a direct realization of those Four Noble Truths by first focusing on impermanence or the non-self of persons. This is the shishi, Now we're looking at these knower of bases in the threefold division of cause, entity, and result. So on the causal level, they will hear this first level of a knower of bases, the hearers and solitary realizers will hear from a teacher about impermanence or non-self of person, or and then meditate on these aspects. And then once they have got a direct insight into that, then they become the second category, which is the entity. So before that, the solitary realizers will have to go through all of these causal things, like they will accumulate merit, they will listen to the teaching, they will rely on a teacher, and then they will go through their respective paths of understanding that impermanence and non-self of persons, first by their paths of accumulation, then by their paths of training and so forth. But when they get a direct insight into that non-self of persons, vis-a-vis what they're focusing on, the Four Truths and impermanence, then they become that second level of the entity, or they become a direct realizer of that truth of the non-self of persons. And then they start to no longer be subject to afflicted states of minds or invalid states of mind. So these disturbing emotions no longer affect them. when they go deeper and deeper into removing the gross level of abandonments, which is the gross obscurations of self-grasping, when the self-grasping on a gross level is stopped, but also starting to go deeper into the seeds also of that self-grasping, these subtle seeds, then they get to the resultant stage of the hearer or solitary realizer of that arhathood. So here what they've done is they've trained in the aspects, but then they've completed the aspect training and they've manifested the result. No.
Tadine lamshi la ani jowa ngo devla yonde lamshi ge jowa de dang zo dang da dongni gomya dang chanjuk sem gomya dang ningju gomya dang jima dang ya chulum so gomya la so wa zo da lama shu la ngan zo dang ngan zo chi ya de ngan zo chi to ba de zo resro be ji chanjuk sem kulung sang ba ji thone ani gomya ta zo dongwani gomya de resro 안데네 람나 쇼도네 티진이 소람당 조람 사디 남시기 조와 차로고 요래 아니 찬스 찬다 지 람시원에 데 가는 자거서는 동반 용무숨도 또 찬스 파고지 동반 용무숨도 통람 차베 내가라 아니 람시원에 데 데려와다 람시원에 데 데려와 저한테 데네가라 아니 양 단달레 사르도 큐노고 코알레 저페야 레 사르도 사고 요 말에 뉴모다 가와고하다 뭔데 규석거랑 요 말에 뉴모 인다 지 그래서 그래 치기 gen 간대지 트래블이네 개와 메시지기 심투야지요 말이야 제가 치기 가져 독자 미페저게 수술 제 노바제와당 직독자라고 가져 라베이네 이게 닝지 숙체로 돼야 당 아니 제 셰럽 숙체로 돼야 당 된대 메시지기 용구요 말 단단 간소이나 미지기 직도자질라 밀로스타비나 남산 심투도더라 스틀레고 말아 진주선마다 배 쉬니 단 되는 세배냠는도도 강글라고 제샤네 단도 콘도사게요 말아 니 짐바다야라 믹짐바다야라 소도도 너 짐바다야데 르롱조 게자 짐바다야지도 어디 르 짐바다야게 체데 샤심사 당벌레는 메시 당쇼고요 말 chanjusemba jimbadaya de la lu longjo gezashagora lu jimbadaya ge sanzamde tudan tumayi me jimbadaya lu jimbadaya ge chede chansen sa thangbo le de ane lu jimbadaya na del dige susu geza gewa peo ma do jige ma sem dichagoyo marwa 제산데 람시 대체 다데야 공배 dobji 대우 가르쳐 버려서는 네 산제지 고마도 보는 거라 어두스 람시기 주용 over 어두스 레스타
Now if we look at this second category in terms of cause, entity and result of an exalted knower of paths, here we are looking at now these are the kind of paths that we're about to train in terms of our motivations when we come to class, when we do these motivations of bodhicitta. We're wanting to cultivate on a causal level these motivations of altruism. And also, of course, we're wanting to meditate on emptiness, the lack of intrinsic nature of all things. So very much what we are doing is training sequentially in those types of exalted knowers of paths, first on a causal level. And we're going to do that by firstly, of course, it doesn't really become proper until we enter into that first Mahayana path of accumulation and then go through to the Mahayana path of training. And then finally, when we get a direct insight into emptiness, the Lamshe, which is the Mahayana path of seeing, then it becomes a valid path. So when we get that valid path consciousness of a Mahayana Arya, then of course, let alone not any afflictions overcoming us, no new negative karma is accrued in terms of creating a further cause of cycling uncontrollably in samsara. None of that. In fact, whatever outer conditions such a person who has generated a Mahayana Arya path faces, they are not perturbed by it. So, in short, whatever external conditions you face, you never get perturbed or upset. In fact, that just becomes a condition for your virtues to increase. So, however someone speaks badly to you, your great compassion just increases. Or whatever negative circumstance you face, your wisdom just gets stronger. Well, that would not really be the case for us at the moment. Just a slight bad glance from someone or bad speech and we get upset, isn't it? But that's not the case for the Arya Bodhisattva. The Arya Bodhisattva, in terms of practicing patience in this first level of the wish to give, can at that level in fact give their limbs away if asked, give their very limbs. So in that sense then the dividing line or the time when to give and when not to give is between ordinary level and first bhumi level in terms of the generosity. Here we talk about being able to give away one's body, wealth, enjoyments, and the roots of virtue, isn't it? So this first one, giving away one's very body, there's a time to give and then there's a time not to give. And the time to give is only when you have reached that first bhumi. So that's when you get that lamshe, or the first Mahayana path. And then that's kind of the entity of it, but then the resultant stage is Buddhahood.
제가 나디 주주 준수양 장은 다 편도 거래를 봐서 가시 팅다데 전신 파워게 미신다게 연대래 당한서 데어멘도로 봤어요. 맞을 데어멘도 되다 주주 출라래. 디 말해서 디 대신나 그 편인데 예신그래서 편도 가져요 메디신. 대신나 아니 더 편인데 되지나 아니 나데 토고도 강조를 데 토고도 제가 내 토야를 당한서 갈래자고도 먼저 최치고도 개와치고도 곰자고도 도스체네 데베 내가 정보를 해서
There's a warning here. There might be a doubt. Why should I study about these things? These levels of bodhisattvas seemed to relate to others that are very far away from oneself. It's a waste of time, you might think, to study about these evolved levels of insights. One shouldn't think like that. One shouldn't think like that. If you study and you know the benefits of the bodhisattvas, the evolved spiritual beings, then you'll know what you're going to get when you obtain to that level. So in that sense, then, knowing the benefits of that state, you'll be encouraged to practice Dharma, to practice virtue, to meditate. No.
망모지기 emotion control 치에 고여서도 emotion 디디다 control 배치두고요다.
You know, everyone wants to know, oh, how do I control my emotions? Well, if you're a bodhisattva, you can control your emotions.
다단다 미세든다 chansim 조람 말 고람 고람데네 고람 탑드드네 고람 가와사자 가와침베이나 디네디게 상모베 진압 정보 쉽차로다 최대나 시간도 단다메 최대인데 자침보지 고르게그라
네
chansim 고람바지 가와유나 디데세 사자다 강바디게디 최대나시 자침보 진압 정보 데라간저 아니 지 수수메바치게나 디네간절라 안 수친랍리야 된데그 누가 요랬다 된 chansim 고람바 사조 컨디션에 최대인지 교바스지 고람게 표현하는 근데 대용보다 그래서 레도 아두스르베나 ngoma dharamsala mi de thogo yo mare pheba male khona ngoma jaga shom de sayam jap ani khamba thangma ton shi mi de thogo yo mare saja de ga ro ta chisu ne ta chisu ta pede tingsan da zambuling pet keda chin to to ro cha de ga an la war do yo ri ji do arba 도다네 참바 몽보 예스 사제도와 레스나나 베 지고요. 아니 지다 신나 직부지게 임바 간실라야 참바 몽보 예스 사자 참 곰잠니 몽보 예스 사제대야 리드 수수베 지고요. 어두서 콘서 곰자베게 다도와 간셰미 도보 통보든데 요르바 요데요다 곰자니를 도보 용그러면 곰마자니 도보 용마라. 제가 근데 용구도 네디 뭐마 간다 박사요라 박사. 박사디 ngema inji 그 종간도 인지 간디지다 콘조 종간나라 쪽사 종간 종간 사저 수고 쇼로 한테도 동대다 근데 뭐 쇼요서도 근데 내가 지 야가숑기 그 잡절린디 상관라네 타와디 상마데 박사디 종간데 난 샤샤라 안 제일베 로니 숨르데베 사자데 미상마야 삼바주잖아요 베데 로 근데 차도 하셔서 당부 종간을 봐 제일 네베데 공잡 최최세 네 다음에 비 동다 진짜 디날 데데도 되네 되게 나나담이 찬슨 직산제 연구를 전주선바 연구를 하는 최게 인데 치디지 최치디체도 배 사자다 된들 그래서 배 딘비 펜도 연구도 알아서 나디 잔다가디 능에말로 숨주 십주 콘라 사자 동보동 야로 지부데 다단다 데라 티징 제라마몽 자페 체네 그래서 티징 셰디 배 사자 시워서야라 누가 시비시도 지상 도저 상마 지상 디 가서를 펜 그 누가 도저 먼저 상마 담배이나 더 찍도로 와지 근데 찍도 되면 다시 도스 찍바레면 도스로
So, and then in terms of the qualities of these beings who have realized, like the Bodhisattvas, where they have meditated, it is said in the teachings that wherever the Bodhisattva who has reached the path of meditation level, the Arya Bodhisattva, the person has such great blessings in the mind that the house they stay in the land becomes like a stupa. In fact, that land, the land where they stay, becomes very blessed. Wherever they stay, the house and the land and so forth, becomes really blessed. And this is reality. It is stated in the text. So we can look at this in terms of contemporarily Dharamsala. Prior to the Tibetans coming there, it was quite almost like a barren place. There were earthquakes there. No one wanted to stay there. But latterly, more recently, Dharamsala has become very, very famous and very well known. So what happened in Dharamsala was that slowly, because of the arrival of the Tibetan monks, that many practitioners went to meditate there. Many practitioners went to meditate in the hills of Dharamsala. And let alone understand what those practitioners, if you just went for a walk there in those hills around where they meditate, you would get some blissful feeling. So this is showing how this works, that the place became blessed by the people who have high insights in the region, high realizations. And also we can see the same in Buxa, the refugee camp in India that was formerly an English prison that was gifted from the Indian government to the Tibetan refugees when they went there. So previously, again, it was a very derelict place that was inhabited by demons and spirits. But then latterly, because of the practice that was done there by the yogis, these monks, and the ones who got realizations, the atmosphere changed. And that's very much because of the blessings, not only of the practitioners themselves who have realized the Dharma, but the teachings that are given, the blessings of the Dharma that is taught. In that sense, you would say that in Buxa there were beings that were in fact Bodhisattva realization level, if not in fact some at the realization level of enlightenment. So therefore Buxa became the place of Dharma. So then we can see then the benefits of such a place where Dharma is taught. Let's look at Chandrakirti, this place. Previously, 30, 40 years ago, not much there, kind of an empty place. But then latterly, what happened? Teachers began to come, not only that, but the teachings were given here. And I think because of the benefit of not only the teachers that have come, but the teachings, then you start to notice, there's something about this place, isn't there? There's a kind of a peaceful feeling here.
어디 다저 팬인데 되게 신나요. 다들 늘 럽들어지 코든 차지. 잔다 첨바 숨어야 되게 남들다. 다 남지에서야 돼 산재기 남들에 아니 유자라들은 남다 빼나 당기 년들랑 예 잔생이 남다 뒤에 창마 유기 차내다 선함에서도 이식 소지 규제. 근데 내는 되고들라다 유단 되고니가 되지 않는 되게 여러 남제들와 두스제네 첨바 숨게 나는 남들한테 제 다단당에 갈릴리오서는 좋아라 남자 좋아라 고 람디 토발라 조아치니 스고라야 와 조와셔야 돼 람디 토바죠 갑디 아니 남자 조와셔야 돼 찬심기 찬주선배기 켐바 솔람 인젤 연구요래 네게 아니 남시 토바치와 남지 토바치와라 조와 인자 아니 남자 조와셔 단다 갑디긴 조와셔야 돼
So I thought it's good to say something about the benefits of a place in terms of getting the blessings of the beings that meditate there, but also the Dharma that's taught. Now coming back to where we are, we're looking essentially, doing a recap of these three exalted knowers, isn't it? So we came to the third one of an omniscient being, a Buddha. Well, what are the causes that go together to become a Buddha? Well, all of those paths we went through, hearers, solitary realizers, all of that. And what the Bodhisattvas have to train in, those valid path consciousnesses, all of them, the cause and effect, can go together here to be subsumed in what it means to be an exalted knower of all aspects, or a Buddha. But now comes to the point of training in it. And in these translations, they're using the translation aspect application, or we can say, what does it mean to train then in these paths to become a Buddha? Well, really, when we talk about training in the paths to become a Buddha or omniscient one, it really begins on the Mahayana path of accumulation, doesn't it? That's where it's really beginning for us. So then we're talking about Lamshe, or the mental continuum of an Arya Bodhisattva in training.
제가 남자 저기 친이죠로 친이들라는데 난다디
전진다. 그 건조여라 탭나나 이래.
kinsuji number reason
this
reason
number 저기 신이 어디스
kinsuji number 뒤에 공배 셔르시 미스면은 저 lab다와
두두
다 kin숨세 다 그래 시시 남시 남제술라 kin숨세 시시세야데 간사담이 무슨도 왜 남들라 시시 남시세야데 동관이 무슨도 왜 남들 시시시하고 왔다니 단다 겨하게 시고 말 남제세야데 산제포지람 제가 캠퍼 숨세야데 어디지 넘버 뒤에 공부 알아도 하시다 넘버 뒤에 공부 다 kinsunji 넘버 갑딩스 템발라 아니 다 망고지어다 태남다 신나 망고지어가네 네 자다 든지자 숨세야데 여르다 넘버 망고지어르 디제디 뒤에 공부 kinsunji 넘버 뒤에 공부 네 공부 진행 셔럽지어와 디스미스면은 조스티 대단 찬진파고 찬진 캠퍼 든지스나 데 갑디 남자 저와디 지난 저와들라 담면도 요체 갑디 남문도 제 남자 저와세 저와시로 캠퍼스음 저와시는 저와 당보디 아니 찬생기 캠퍼 다 처음에 이제는 요래 찬생 캠퍼 튼직스 남자 저와다 찬생 캠퍼 튼직스
Okay, so now then if you have the text on the 70 topics, go to page 5 because we're starting to look at these training things, how one trains or applies on a causal level to get to the goal of Buddhahood. So really, when we look at this definition, Bodhisattvas Yoga conjoined with the wisdom cultivating a compendium of the aspects of the three exalted knowers. It, an exalted knower of a Bodhisattva, are mutually inclusive. So here it's the Bodhisattvas Yogas. The compendium of aspects, compendium means all of the things needed, the valid paths needed to become a Buddha are joined together or condensed, right? They're collected together or condensed as a compendium. So those aspects, those things to be known, are condensed. and they are of the three exalted knowers that we went through. You have to know what it means to train in as a knower of bases, what it means to train in as a knower of paths, and what it means to train in as a knower of all. So those three together. So it's talking about it and a knower of a bodhisattva being mutually inclusive, because knowing these three exalted knowers is conjoined with wisdom, cultivating it. So if we look at, for example, what it means to train in terms of a knower of bases, then it's going to be the non-self of persons. But if we look at what it means to train in the aspect of a knower of paths, then it's going to be the wisdom consciousness realizing emptiness. And if we want to know what it means to train in the exalted knower of all then you have to have all of these aspects together on seeing their resultant level. So then when they're divided, there are 173. So, but the boundaries, then we need to know that this definition of training in complete aspects is mutually inclusive with a bodhisattva knower, an exalted bodhisattva arya, and it begins on the path of accumulation right up to the end of the mental continuum of a sentient being.
Yep. 배미단 모다단 강바단 잘라단 싱단 상마 통구도 와 또 성도 어디나 시스라고 왔다 제주 넘버 뒤에 건 봤어야 돼.
Right, so now we're encouraged to look at this, cultivating a view of the compendium of aspects, all of the aspects we need to train. It is like when you go to the top of a building and you get a view from the top. You look down and you see all the buildings, all the cars and all the people. That's your compendium, that's your view.
곰야 잠니 곰게 냠뇨야 원래도 근데 곰자 두고요라. 아니 이나다 단다 그 드네 용거 빼나 단다 남자 제외 내가 용어 좀적하는 좋아서 남자 좋아서와니 실라송도 되고 계절을 뭐지 남신인지 나라와 된다. 계절을 뭐지 아니 제외 계절을 뭐지 게 남신인지 나라 좋아서 실라송도 되고 제가 대 가르친 거라서는 chanjuk sim 토발라 땅 예바디 신의 토고바디 도버다디 신의 마담나나 용기가 말해 저나다 신의 항동 송도 되와체로와 다 신의 항동 송도 되면은 신의 예바디 고고요다 chanjuk sim 제자 안디 네다 신의 톱사나 곰자디 쇼지 렐하고 차로요 따로 제자 이제 기존이 나버 뒤에 곰바서야 된다 곰도고요다 신의 톱사로고
Right, so now what we need to know then is, in terms of these trainings, or training in these applications, what we're training in, the compendium of aspects. This is talked about by Gyaltsab Rinpoche as it must be a union of calm abiding and special insight. So then how is the Bodhisattva going to train? With a union of calm abiding and special insight. Now, what this is saying is that least case, you need to have cultivated shamatha or calm abiding, preferably, best case, unified with special insight.
당연히 디 곰시 뒤용도 곰사데 곰자단 곰곰당 림바카시죠. 되게 많이 쉬는 펜도 연구를 해서.
So in this case, because we're talking about meditation, I thought, because there are so many different types, it'd be good to go through them a bit.
배는 먼저 뒤용 먼저 람림 곰세도 데라 데제니 람림 샤곰 샤워스도 아니 셈나라 이샤점네 신이 딘주 텐조든지 치워메다 와체지마 셈나라 이샤접 아니 데마 이샤접와 들라다 딜라 딩나 데라 샤곰세그레 다르와.
So let's look at an example when we meditate on the Lamrim, the sequential stages on the path to enlightenment. We do often what's called a glance meditation. So here we'll get an overview of the stages, relying on the spiritual friend, perfect human rebirth, death and impermanence. This is called the glance view of the entire path.
다디 바른데 마티운데 아니 신이든지 텐저든지는 딘데 요레스 첼리데 근데 당보 제바체로 제발레고로 시럽 제바체에 탈라 아니 심 내지 샤도를 네 제조 송디스 데데 제르무진기다 믹스에기 꼼자다 심 몽보지기 제바체나 꼼용고 말을 꼼신은 제바용고 말했지 여와치기요로 제르무진 제바체에 탈라 아니 배는 신이든지 내가로다 똑바로 직신 타도 대바 직질레는데 대가는 심샤지 아니 대운데 아니 제배 장배는 조금 작은 거라.
Okay. So then, what one has done has gotten a broad overview of the stages of the path by glance meditation. But then one has this order in one's mind of the stages of the path. But then you're going to, with your wisdom, analyze each of the stages doing an analytical meditation. And as Lama Tsongkhapa says, this analytical meditation should be done in union with setting or placement meditation. To give an example, let's say you are doing an analytical meditation on how to rely correctly on the spiritual friend. Well, you've analyzed it, and then you single-pointedly place your focus with faith on the spiritual friend, having analyzed the qualities. So here, the setting or single-pointed placement meditation is induced initially by your analysis of the topic. And then there's a way to meditate whereby there's a mode of apprehension of the object. How do you apprehend the object?
아니 김제도는 제가 ngishiki 다 진단유 차로다 고도로다 그러라 이 진단유 전에 로데 베나 미다와 참고미야당 동반이 고미야당도 진단유 전에 공단들 했어.
Right, so this mode of apprehension of analyzing the object, let's take the example of emptiness. So the mind is focused on the lack of intrinsic nature of things, but at the initial level you are doubting whether or not things have this true existence. But then you come to doubt tending towards the fact that they are in fact lack intrinsic existence, these phenomena. Then you get an ascertainment of that. Then it becomes definitive. Then you start to realize it. And you would take the same approach with subtle impermanence and so forth.
똑똑 쉐르와 동반이 된 건저 로데 동이 뭐 차요 말와 이나건저 로데 동이 또도 아니 로데 ngol라 로데 페데 동반이 다위지 차로 다간다 출래 주샤서 들어와
야야야
디 진단 유치는 다 도단 직제 다베 진단 유치는 로코랑 오제요 베는 로코랑 오제 베는 건저 닝지 고면데 심제든제 동에데 되는지 말아냐 별로데 고면데 수수로데 된 ngol라 파제 아니 진단 유자 맞을 로데 ngol 파제 돼요 찬주그 셈다 닝제다 람다 도저 그 ng오제바시 진단 유자면 별로 ng오제바시 차로다 또 도저 내가 좀 물어봐 신고에 통
What's good for us to know in terms of this way of meditating when we talk about the mode of apprehension means the way the mind is apprehending the object is that, for example, when the mind is meditating on emptiness, the lack of intrinsic nature of reality, it is as if there's water merged into water. But here, the mind hasn't become emptiness, certainly not. But the mode of apprehension is as if subject-object have fused. In the second case, for example, when you're meditating on great compassion, because you're meditating, how wonderful if beings were free from suffering and its cause, your mind actually becomes that great compassion. or your mind becomes the bodhicitta because it's manifest that valid mind. So it's good to know the difference between those two modes of apprehending the object, 1 and 2.
다들 명검세 봐. 그래서 dombakom jizun domakom generasi komgodo meba신 일에 샤제 메바식도 되 지 여팅도 어딜 메곰서다 메베 메곰.
Okay. And then there's another type of meditation where you visualize. So here you have in front of oneself an aspect of Buddha, Tara, one's Lama, strong faith that object is there.
인터넷 유당은 용다게 제곰세야데 제바체들와. 디 제바체디 코라야 제바체베기 생근내지 둠투야 된데 용고요래. 배낭원도 단다 남자저와다 시셰되거나 생고란 대간라 대제다 디 가르지나 텐제 대톱스나나 고 데제로 찍거나 심내지 되나라다 제바체되로. 이네 디유 먼저게 되게 제바되게 심난라야 아니 셰르페야다 심난라 대화 진두고요래로. 당연히 되게 제바체야데 네거티브 제바치고라 미디 가르시기도 미디 경 가르도 그 미치도 사보도 그 가르서 그래 네거티브 사보도 다지지 미치도 전야시에 되죠라 되게 제바 되게 선범하기 없어요라 텔라 곰시게요 말이다 텔라야다 주도 제래.
Okay, now analytical meditation then can also relate to placement meditation. If you've done, let's say you've done an analysis of these training in these complete aspects of what it takes to be a Buddha, all of these aspects. So one part of your mind has analyzed these attributes, what you need to train in, but then another part of the mind gets extremely blissful and enthusiastic, or the intelligence increases as a result of that. That is more single-pointed. Now, often when we do our analysis, it's down a negative track, or someone's got that fault, they've got this fault, they said this to me, so we make it go down a negative spiral. That's not meditation. Just letting you know.
사실 meditation, the mindfulness, bema, but sometimes someone
sometimes our understanding of meditation and mindfulness, well, that blurs way over. It gets weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker.
Yeah. 다가데 베 디직체. 근데 조금 세야지. 아니 미과직 제지 대간을 심샤지 대지도.
Yeah.
근데 조금 세워라다 되게.
And then there is a type of meditation called placement meditation. Here, the mind is focused single-pointedly on its object and doesn't waver from it.
다디 체인디 뒤용은 따도네 공부서 공도네 따오서 신데 계제와 다도 상모 되는데 따도네 공부서서 되는데 최탐제 직례직되네 총어래샤스로와 근데 귤레되네 총어래샤 생활 가리는 나래 디도 가리는 규진레되네 총어래샤 다디 개정부 쇼제다 데릭데 간서 상모 당과에 들어 제 상모 당배이나 다디 직례직되네 중심교 좀 미시지게 되네 맞춤에 심난을 찾은 적이 수도 자자자다면 이중원에 두대와 근데직 민독스 상무 당연데 대 따워제송아 따워제와 되게 따워내와 되가라 아니 심샤 제 동문이 가는 심샤도 있나 따도네 공부쳐왔어 tukse to
Gislatesko gombadi
tato kombatsu
ale settling on the view
tato ne kombatsu tato tawasa de tomani tawro
ya ta yangi robs tikshuna ti agame do
gyujena de ne chore esro te kejimodo ngarangi nimaji ki dedu khare ina gyudan jinlo de ne chore sha ate zamone chashelo de ne chore sha 직 때문에 중심 조주면서 단단한 셈나라 나스야 되게 미신다 된 감노가 도와지대 자자자다 이중원을 두어라지요 나와샤고로 디 메와데 파상로 단토이나 되게네 동반이 간라다 하상 담에스나레 되간라 다와디니베 되간라 다데 이간라 아니 심샤제 마인거제 데도이나 다도네 콤바체와세들
Okay, and then there's a type of meditation that's called settling on the view. I mean, this means settling on the view of reality. in this sense, then one comes to see that all phenomena are interdependent. So let's say they're related by cause and conditions or parts. So let's say you go through your day and sometimes you're feeling happy, sometimes you're feeling sad, but then you do a thorough analysis of those emotions and you come to see that, well, the reason I'm feeling happy or sad is a product of cause and conditions. It is not an autonomous thing. And or if someone approaches you and harms your sense of self or sense of I, like he or she harmed me, then you settle on the view by thinking that, hold on, what I'm seeing here is that the person that's harming me is 100% solidly existing outside myself and are the condition for my being harmed. But when you settle on the view, you come to see that that is not the case. You realize that it is not 100% coming from the external object. So here you're settling on the non-self of persons, that view, and that's what it means to settle on the view.
다 디네 곰도네 다오초 세저로 디가래라나 먼저 당당 먼저 우중 곰제기와
Yeah.
우중 곰잡잡잡잡잡 네 간단지를 가시 세시어 세리기 차데 시방원송도와 가시 미 가시 원송도 내다 네 뭐만에 랍상 지랑즈디 투제요나 우중들라 투제 망스단제딜라 곰 망스 잡이나 아니 되게 곰디 딱 곰자고라면 우중 곰제 세지고 당갈 잡대고라
Yeah.
대 오자위인데 주미지 남도의 제파까지 아니 먼저 시방원송고래 세리차더라 시바 세리장은 세운데 네 세리차데 랑문에 두가지 나데가 여러와나 티나오나 신지 투면도 상당한데 네 곰도네 따와서 곰도네 따와서 곰제베도 그 따와파 니송아야
Okay.
내가 배천보여
Yeah. And then there is a meditation by the power that's induced by the power of one's experience in meditation. So when you do breathing meditation, when you do breathing exercise, some people have commented to me that when we do it, for sustained periods of time, and in retreat, for example, they come to get to quite a lucid state of their mind, or they're introduced to the state of their own mind that is quite clear and lucid, this lucidity. And there's a kind of single-pointed quality there as well, a stability. So here, what has happened is that the thoughts of inappropriate attention or invalid mental constructs have abated, and the natural lucid or wakefulness-like of the mind manifests. And this is the meditation of settling on the view by experience. Yes. And then when we talk about meditating, this seems to be the most important main point, isn't it?
아니 디제니체 퇴남단 신남선 퇴남사데 유체 남바사데 샤가고요레와 무슨가고요 남바사데 인지질레 템부민도 와
민도아기스나 다데샤
다 남바사데 네 유지 유코랑게 뭐신다 마데베게 체주지요레와 포바디나 포고코랑미시 지메도다 마데니게 코랑게 체주지요레다
Okay.
어딜라다 남바스기요레다
Okay, so coming back to training in complete aspects, vis-a-vis page 5 in this text, complete aspect, training or aspect, application. This word aspect is quite difficult to define. In English, it's a bit slippery, but in the Tibetan, let's say that there are aspects of the object and aspects of the subject. If you look firstly at the aspects of the object, let's look at, for example, the cup, for example, will have aspects that the flower doesn't have. That's the best way we could explain it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That number ni design ro so poba korang ngola yo jigda poba de ngobe shina madeba in su singdo da shebadi singdo odela ya tönamsa de yudishe shenamsa de shebadele ya jagorda.
Right, so now let's come back to our example of the cup that has its own particular aspects to be known in terms of being an object. That's the first level of aspect. But then there's also a subjective level. The person who comes to know the aspects of the cup is a knower of aspects. So again, there are two levels to this word aspect. The aspects to be known and the knower of aspects. So now we get to this fourth chapter that is going to be quite hidden and difficult to understand. So get ready. Oh.
디콩 주제디게 단단한서 디콩은 딘달 커버 챙겨지도 디게딩 언서 로투 날라다 딱값 씹을라 값 씹어 찍어라 로직 따가로 단도 참은 잘해 값 씹어도 값 씹어 찍어라 언서 세르치 로직 따가
Getting it into perspective. Just the part that we've come up to already in the last weeks of this class, we would have spent 6 years on in Sarah J. And then this chapter, we're going into the fourth chapter, 1 year on that, and still we wouldn't finish. So look how we've done it.
먼저 커버를 망부쳐오래. 진짜 엑스트라 진짜 도와주시 않으시지. 제단 타상기 진짜 되게 커버 치도고요 말아.
Yeah, so
먼저 술라 진짜 술라 당랑기.
알레.
진짜 당랑기 네 마도그리면시.
The monks who would complete this fourth chapter would be the ones that went out of their way to have extra classes to complete it. It wasn't in this monastery curriculum to complete it within a year.
세상다 될래야. 아니 담에 남서죠. 넘버 봐. 다단다 넘버 전남사데 유르체 다시 유디제체 다 되게만저 제상한저 다 로르 개점벌에 유당 유진스로서와 다 되지 시행은 유스도 배나 속 포바다 두수상마 유레다.
Yeah.
다 유진라서는 쉐바들이로. 제가 유당 유진이스지에 유당 유스. 다 로르 야고 저요나 데네즈도 야고 싱그레. 로르 저면은 사자르다.
Okay, so let's come back to this twofold division of aspect. There is the object side and the subjective side. For those that have studied mind and awareness and knowers, you would have known that from the object side, that's, for example, form in the cup. But from the subjective knower side, we're talking about the consciousness that knows the cup. So if you've understood that clearly in awareness and knowers, you'll be fine. If not, this could be catch up.
다 제가 갑질 네 넘버시에 갑기 랑이 미든저 좀리에 켐바데 단데 디셔고 다 갑시베게 단다 다에 단다 넘버 자단 주저 손셰송아 어디게 넘버 디셰인데 딜려야다 넘버데 카레 셰온지 장갈라 셰남셰고라 랑 미든저 좀리에 켐바 아니 갑디 님부초 셰남지치니스 빼나 미다고도베 간사담에도베 간사담은 무슨도베 쉐버시도와 디 시시기 셰남레다.
됐고 시시기 셰남.
다 시시기 더남데 가래. 간사담에들에다. 간사담에디 유로와다. 다 간사담은 무슨도베 쉐바데 가래. 유진으로 와셔서. 다 간사담에디 더남체. 간사담은 무슨도베 이시디 셰남체 하고 쉐바드 차송하다. 다 쉐바 차송하디.
칼레칼레 연결을 합는
때는 단다갑디기다 이 값시베 넘버 셰운디 장가라 랑 미든저 존이 캔버스 그 진이샤용 거로와 답변은 변화 다 가서 담이 라말라들람사 미다고라더와
야
미다고 무슨 또베 아니 파고주기 캔바데 와디 랑 미든저 존이 캔바레 당연은 내가 데려와겠더라 항일 신남한테 나 말랍체 랑 미든저 거리 좀 그래서나 그 단지 정도 거다 그 미다고 떠와 미다고 또 인데네 양자 따고 징기요 말아 bena ngarang zu ta ngarang zu sam ta ne wa nga geji jo do ran shi re sam ta de ne ngarang zu khesang ki nga da thiring ki nga da san ki nga chang ma chik ba yin ne nga lo mong bo de gore thi ji de nga chala mong bo gore nga pesha mong bo gore so jo che du zu me cha ro da mi din jo de nim bo cha da de nga mi da bo go mi un ju jang ga la nga zo lo khare phen do yung gore nga zo horin che de me cha ro gore sena me cha ro gore ani thang do phen do azida 메제 통도질에 대하면도 nga zoe jabi me mila zoe jana thondamendo nga meze thola dangi me nga da lega dindo samutane midinjo di jomdo da tangzi di jomdo go yorda jisa tangzi jombe ni we ni so midago to belo dere.
So if you, for example, the definition of an omniscient mind is when it acts as a basis for these superimpositions that are abandonments on the path. So then let's say we have an exalted knower that is directly realizing impermanence. So what's the object of abandonment here? The object of abandonment is grasping at permanence. So this would be the type of mind that thinks that you were the same person you were yesterday and will be the same person you are tomorrow. So then you will be clinging to all these things you think you might need because you're grasping at a permanence of self. But if you've realized the impermanence of self on that level, then you won't have these strong needs to accumulate, to plan, to do all these things we do from day-to-day life, because that level of grasping at a self, vis-a-vis grasping at a permanent self, will have been stopped.
Dilaya bena dilaya shenam slapsonga chedan dita shenam la khala usna bena chansi ta phagwe ju midabu to we midabu musum de sherab ishi dila shenam che shishi sina kona shishi ro
yeah
shishi sta dilaya ni re shishi shenam da thonam ta midabu de khare thonam re
la disco
midabu de thonam re da sebu cha songa
yeah
shishi koran la nam ni re thonam da shenam ni midabu de 미다부 무슨데 왜 시제들라 전남다 신남니 전남데 가래 미다고데 미다고데 신남데 미다고도 왜 미다부 무슨데 로고라래다
yeah mind itself
시레 넘버 들어가고
So let's give an example then of the object and subject we talked about. So there was aspects to be known and the knower of those aspects. So when we talk about the exalted knower of bases, what their object to know is impermanence, and what the knower of aspects is knowing is that's the mind itself. So it's the mind itself that's realizing impermanence, but what is to be known is impermanence.
Tadi shishigi shenam sheyundu ani kansandamen usum dowe ishi de shenam chazwa.
Yeah. So once that person has a direct realization of the non-self of persons, taking that understanding deeper, then the person has, manifested that aspect in his or her continuum. So then they become a knower of that aspect of the non-self of persons.
Yeah. Rang midujo junwe kimas da lamina cheza ani rang midujo jomnu do da lamina lamin sinjel ro
yeah so let's look at it like this. For it to become a knower of aspects, and here we're talking about the subjective mind, it necessarily has to be a valid path that acts as a countermeasure to these hallucinations and invalid minds.
당조 담에 도 연주 아니 당지데 미디움 당지데 매버 차로요. 다 당지 매버 차스는 아니 당지 좀 좀나 아니 직대자다 시단다 콘도다 아니 와다 디즈리도도 다 주는 용서라고요 말이야. 다 담에 도스는 아니 전조단다 가서 가는저 emotion control chitugu yorda ro ngune yonsa yo marda deja jose yo mare shidan jesa yo mare Ada tindeji yunada ji tindeji yunada ngala ji godu samsara ji ta yungsara ro. Ini ngonzo ta di gom khande jagodo samdang. Shin de chejo de zo kuro ngo de garjana. Pen de zo samdang me ani khodyen di thone. Tagda ji le yongdo le ro ta ko.
Now, let's say if you realize the lack of a self of person, then you no longer have self-grasping at the person. So then again you have what you're meditating on and the knower of that aspect of it. So here, once you realize non-self of persons and self-grasping ceases, ego-clinging ceases, then there are none of these invalid emotions that we experience. You don't have desire, you don't have anger, you don't have jealousy. And we're always talking about emotional control. Well, once you have realized non-self, then none of these invalid minds that come up or invalid emotions that come up can affect us. So therefore then you'll be inspired to meditate on that, because by seeing the entity or result, you'll want to go for it.
어디 다디 시시게 남아들라 남아 유지잡진 여러 봐. 매번 남만 내서는 미요나 덴바스를 하시는 라는 팀이 정하세. 다디 덴바 실어요 저거.
나름
덴바시 동네도 뭐 군주도 뭐 거다 되게 안저다 덴시 신고래에서 다 개좀 시기도. 근데 덴바시디 신 덴바시 제주 주룩시 덴바시 당한저 뭐만 럽제 먹고 도차라.
그래요.
다 전도 가시다 하고 가시 싸워요 될. 다 저는 디시디 야구 장고를 나오네. 디시디 딱 베티 탄도데 개정보를 한데 디나라야 다 가르치는 마시나야 디시간을 팔자다. 로.
Right, so now getting back to the knower of bases, we talk about what has to be known for such a person, and what is the consciousness, the subjective mind, have to know. So what it's focusing on are these Four Noble Truths. So there are 27 aspects of those, but in short, your focal object here is the Four Noble Truths, which I've talked about many, many times. This is at the bottom of page 11 in the big book, if you've bought it, Ocean of Sport. So, you know, at that level, you've got to know the Four Truths.
덴바시디 가라서는 동해도 먹고지도 먹고 남대로와 네 덴바시라스다 제주 덴바 당무스물라 제주 시시체 와 덴바 당무스물라 시 중이 차송아
Yep.
한 남대는 제주 정화체 이들다 뉴스들도 다래서
Yep. Now, each of these four truths has aspects related to it. True sufferings has four aspects. True origins has four aspects. True cessations has four aspects, and true paths has 15, making 27 aspects for a knower of bases.
야, 다 베진 다 대샤로. 다디 랑종연 저는 지난주 단다. 강라야 다 시실람 신남제송기 중오 대비송구도다 남조 저와 기친이 있는 남조 저와라 실라송도 있고도 뭐 되게 생지도도 살 아니 다 곰다한들 친숨지 넘버 뒤에 곰다 아니 진다 유니신의 곰다 뭐와 유지신의 곰다 제공 곰다 조공 곰다 제조 송진이 곰다 어디에 디직신나 다 야고요 봐.
So for those that are doing self-study and discussion group, it would be good to review what we've been through. So we talked about essentially the three exalted knowers, didn't we, in terms of their cause, entity and result. Go through those individually and then start to look at this definition of training. What does it mean when you train in these complete aspects? When you train in everything you need to train in to become a Buddha? What does that mean? And what is the meaning of the definition therein? And why, in order to train in those aspects to become a Buddha, do you need to have calm abiding and special insight unified therein? Then we also looked at all the different types of meditation. Glance meditation, analytical, single-pointed placement meditation. We looked at being able to visualize. We looked at the mode of apprehension meditation when we're focusing on emptiness and impermanence. And then finally, we looked at these other types of meditation where you gain experience into the lucid nature of your own mind. It's good to go all through those. Oh yeah. The glance view meditation we need to do. Oh yeah. Yeah. So now it's also good for us to review this word aspect. And we said that there were aspects to be known from the object side, but also the person that knows those aspects from the subjective mind side. So we should go into those too and try and understand them clearly. But then also to start to go into the Four Truths, because knowing the Four Truths is very important, and to know how that there are, as a knower of basis, an exalted knower of basis, there are 27 aspects of those Four Noble Truths. It gets a little bit tricky and lots of numbers, but there you go, we should study it and know it, or make an effort.
다 드즈도 다 자야 가즈 장장도 와도 가즈 로로 가즈 장장 아니 장바디 상무대 대스당 상무당지 당기 아니 다도네 콤바초다 콤도네 따오초서 드즈기 콤자다 네 제금 뒤중어랑도 딱 콤지 껴고요와 네 콤디 가르쳐주고 돌아 디나네 상무당지 콤잡네야고요라
Now, I know everyone always says, we're so busy, but you can, in fact, make time for study if you really put effort into it. Just do that. And when you settle on a subject to study, then reflect on it. I mentioned a way of gaining experience into your own mind by breathing and just doing that level of knowing your own mind, but also by settling on the view. We talked about meditating by settling on the view, the fact that all things are coming together due to being dependent arisings. So then, finally, one should meditate through analysis. We'll stop for today.
Page 31 for the short mandala.
Sangye shinde mide Droga nanda jen la jokara sho Goze radin shin Namga tingle joj Dore muse dado ne joji Guru rane mendela kanye atayami.
Page 33 for prayers of dedication.
To the merits of these
virtuous
beings without exception,
rejoicing and requesting that the Buddhas I now dedicate all this for awakening. I dedicate all these roots of virtue with the dedication praised as the best. So that I might